Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Joining me for this episode is co-host Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his site, readandreaction.com. Will, you noticed it right away. If people are watching this on YouTube, hey, new look.
Yeah, you got the blue background. Everybody needs to come check it out, see what you got going on here. But got to change it up every once in a while. Otherwise, we never know whether it's 2019, 2020, or 2021. Especially since we're not allowed to leave the house. Though that seems to be subsiding. So hopefully we'll all get out. And I got to be honest, I had a conversation today about which games I want to come down to Gainesville for. And I have never wanted to have that conversation.
Number one is easy.
It is. But I have never wanted to have that conversation worse in my entire life, and to actually think about it and think about the fact that, they're talking about having full stadiums in Gainesville and Tuscaloosa and all through the SEC. That's exciting given the year that we just had and everything that everybody in the country's gone through. So, college football is one of those things where you sort of remember where you were based on what's going on in the season. Last year was unique, and, we'll see. Hopefully 2021 has some of that in store for us as well.
Yeah, shout out to the YouTube chat. They noticed the look right away as well. So Quentin Lee, Matthew Hutchins, everybody, thank you much. So that's where the TV background comes in play, Will.
Well, unfortunately, I've got a face for radio, so you gotta make the graphics pop so people are looking at other things.
Yeah. So, all right, Will. First scrimmage of the spring for the Gators. A lot of news and notes coming out late Friday over the weekend, and looks like the defense. We'll get into it, but looks like the defense got the better of the offense in the first scrimmage.
Yeah, I mean, but I think we probably should expect that. Well, so first, I think we should preface it by saying that everything that comes out of spring camp is a lie. We've learned that over the last 3 or 4 years. I mean,
Spurrier said preseason was talking season. Spring is lying season.
Yeah, I mean, 2017, Felipe Franks looked great. The offensive line was fantastic, and then the season came, and we were in trouble 6 minutes in against Michigan. So that's the first thing I'd preface it with. The other thing is that you've got the offense and the defense going against each other, and so if one guy looks good on defense, inevitably that means the guy on offense looks bad, or vice versa. And so whether or not you're going to be able to really take anything away, I think I mentioned this last week or 2 weeks ago, that the thing I'm looking for in the spring is there somebody who's flashing, right? Is there somebody who you look at and say, wow, that's different? David Wonderlick actually tweeted about that today, that Kadarius Toney is a guy who looked like that. He said Desmond Watson has been somebody that he's seen who looks like that this spring. And so those are the things I think you look at and say, that guy can make an immediate difference and is somebody that I'm looking forward to seeing in the fall. And that's really what we're looking for when we're looking at these news and notes. I mean, you maybe can glean a little bit from it, but I think for the most part, it's, either if you have biases one way and news comes out, you're like, okay, that supports my biases. And if you have biases the other way and the news comes out, you're like, all right, well, that supports my biases too, because at the end of the day, I think to expect Florida to have a complete team at this point with all the youth, with all the turnover, and then with the fact that this is their first spring practice in 2 years, I think it's probably a little bit much, but that doesn't mean the team won't be good. It just means that it's the first couple of weeks of practice, and hopefully they're making mistakes, because if they're making mistakes now, they'll learn from them and they won't make them in the fall. And that's what the springtime is for.
Absolutely. We'll get into all that. I'll expand on Will's thought right there. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown at news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the episodes there, as well as News4Jax coverage of the Gators. A lot of you right now watching live on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're watching live, or if you're watching after we post it. It'll really help us out here on Gators Breakdown. And also, find us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So also, Will, I think it's probably important to point out that look, we're not allowed to be there in person. We're not allowed there to watch. But have heard most of what we're about to discuss from multiple sides. Now, take of that what you will. It is hearsay. It is what people are behind the scenes of what I've dug around to find and what other colleagues have dug around to find as well. And we kind of just discuss and take it from there. So make of it what you will. This spring, might be a no-win, as kind of Will was saying for a lot of people out there right now. Look, as bad as the defense was last season, if the offense struggles, many would take that as the defense still being bad, and now the offense is falling back because they can't take advantage of a bad defense. Or they want that trust that they won't trust that the defense is all that good because of all the changes going on offense. So it's kind of a catch-22. I guess you'd say for spring practice. If the offense does good, well, the defense still stinks. If the defense does good, well, the offense is going through some transition, and that's what you expect. So the spring will might be judged pretty harsh based on that, all that. But scrimmages just in general are different. Mullen told us today in his press conference they limited the quarterbacks to do certain things. They put them in certain situations to see how they react, and that goes for the whole team as well. A lot of situational football in these scrimmages, and the coaches put them in spots to work on what they have trouble with. These aren't just go out there and what you do well. That time will come, but this is a time to get better, and that comes by focusing on aspects that need the most work. Will, you don't go out there and just do the things that you can do well. You got to expand the playbook. You got to get better in certain areas, and that's what these scrimmages are for.
Yeah, I mean, I think fall is when you start focusing on the things that you do well, right? That's where the coaches have had an opportunity to look at these spring scrimmages, to look at the tape, to look at the reps and say, okay, what are we going to be able to do? Are we going to be able to have a 7-step drop? No, our right tackle struggles. Okay, well, then we need to do some things to work around that. But certainly in the spring, you got to let him block for, a 7-man drop if that or a 7-step drop if that happens to be a place where he's weak. Same thing with a quarterback, right? If he's struggling with touch on the ball, okay, we're going to need to make him throw that ball, see if he can get better, see if he can figure out a way to get the ball in there. And then if he can't, then in the fall, we're not going to make that call when it comes, 3rd and 3 against LSU. You're not going to have a deep crossing route that he's got to put good touch on the ball. So, but it's one of those things where you just got to see what you have, right? You gotta push these guys. You got to stretch them. You got to see how much they can handle, both from a physical standpoint, but also a mental standpoint as well, right? The install, see whether the quarterback can process all the information you're giving him, and that way how much you can install in a given week when it comes to the fall, because every quarterback is going to be a little bit different. I suspect that if you look back at Kyle Trask, that he was somebody who could process an awful lot when you installed a game plan. Is Emory Jones going to be the same way? I have no idea. He might be able to process more. We just don't know that. And I'm not sure that Dan Mullen knows that about Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson just yet, which means he's going to push them and he's going to ask them to do things that, like you said, they're uncomfortable doing with a purpose. And, we said this sort of coming into the spring is I'm not real worried about the offense. I think Dan Mullen's going to find a way to score points. It's going to be different. I don't think it'll be it clearly won't be the exact same offense as last year. There'll probably be things that they're limited doing that they could do last year, they can't do this year. And there will be things that they're better at doing this year than they were last year. And, that's what happens every year in college football because there's so much turnover, and Florida just happens to be experiencing an awful lot of turnover. And then, coming off of the 3 losses, I think everybody is maybe a little bit more on edge than they would be had they pulled out the game against LSU or had they put up a better fight against Oklahoma. But it is what it is. You got those 3 losses coming into the offseason, and so I think people are a little bit jumpy. But at the end of the day, again, I hesitate to take too much from the spring game. A couple of years ago, Trask threw a pick 6 to Huggins in the spring game, and the only thing that I really got out of that game was that Kyle Pitts flashed. Right, he was the guy when all right, he's pretty good. Those are the things I think we want to be looking for, especially in the spring, and the things the coaches are looking for. I know there's been quite a bit of discussion about Nick Elksnis flashing a tight end, and so with the departure of Eric Gilbert, that becomes more important to have one of those true freshmen step in and at least be able to take snaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start at the top with quarterback. Defense won today. We'll start at quarterback, then transition to defense, and then we'll go through just a little bit of quick nuggets from there on out, kind of finishing up with the offense again. But first, several series, Emory Jones led the offense. Offense did not get a first down, having trouble get past his first read, is what was said about Emory. Showed little touch, oftentimes threw too hard, inaccurate most of the time. Not a good day for the quarterbacks in general. At least a few interceptions by note. Not a great offensive day all in all. One interception was returned for a long touchdown by Lloyd Summerall. Turned it on a little bit in the second half. The offense did. Emory Jones threw touchdowns to Jacob Copeland, Kamori Gamble. Anthony Richardson somewhere along the way also had a touchdown run at some point. So There we go. Offensive line, Will. You might can pin it on some of that, but it was Richard Garage at left tackle, Ethan White at left guard, Stuart Reese at center, Josh Braun right guard, and right tackle Geno Lands. That was the first set. You know they're going to shuffle it around in a spring in a spring scrimmage. So that's just the initial that was put out there. You know, heard that just were not very good. Could not run between the tackles. The offense appears right now. We said this last week going in. You can look at a lot of the one-on-one drills that they were kind of putting out there on Instagram Live and all that kind of stuff. You could already tell the defensive line was pretty much ahead of the offensive line. That continued into the scrimmage as well. No surprise. And look, no surprise also once you start identifying who's playing offensive line, who's playing defensive line, the matchups there. But all in all, still not a good day for the offensive line. So, look, I think take all that into account when looking at the quarterback play. Historically, Mullen throws a lot at his quarterbacks early on in spring, especially in these scrimmages to see what they can handle. As we've said, I doubt many design runs were called, Will, for the quarterbacks in this situation. With an offensive line in transition, it's going to be tough for these quarterbacks early on. But the biggest takeaway, Will, probably the lack of touch, the inaccuracy coming from Emory Jones. I think that's what we've seen a bit in his limited action. And it was probably the biggest takeaway out of this scrimmage, not getting past his first read. Look, that can come from a couple places. Not being comfortable in the offense in a lot of situations. Has not been out there passing the ball time and time again in games the last couple of years. But you hope that's not the case. He's got a lot of experience in this offense. He should have a grasp of the offense as long as he's been here. So hopefully that's not the case. But look, the offensive line not giving the best protection and Emory just not being comfortable in general, and that leading to not trusting his time that he has to throw, not getting past his first read, not setting his feet, and his mechanics go wrong from there. Without seeing, we just don't know. I'm just bringing up scenarios here. Mullen said today in his press conference, Emory putting touch on passes comes with experience. The more he reads defenses and the more he has to make throws, as you kind of alluded to earlier, Will, the more he's asked to make these throws in these certain situations, the better he'll get. So there are a lot of throws Emory can make that Trask couldn't, Dan Mullen brought up. So that will allow him to do some different things. And Mullen went on to extend that Kyle Trask was more accurate, but Emory can throw it deeper, throws well on the run. They'll adjust and build around the strengths of Emory, much like they did Kyle. So, well, I think, taking all that into account, without being there, we hear about the struggles of the offensive line. To me, it's kind of symbiotic and probably expected that if Emory Jones is going to struggle, and this is me just pure guessing here, it probably isn't all on him.
No, I mean, so I think, obviously I'm a big proponent of going back to high school stats. And if Emory Jones had completed 54% of his throws and it had been like 9 yards an attempt, I'd be like, okay, we need to be worried because he doesn't necessarily have a track record of being accurate. But his senior year completed 62% of his passes, 13.3 yards per attempt. So we're talking about a guy who went downfield, and we're talking about when he went downfield, he was effective. Now, he only had 144 attempts that year in 12 games. So it's 12 times a game. So they didn't throw very much. So from the standpoint of like a guy having a lot of reps and having like fantastic touch on the ball, yeah, I can see why that might be an issue, right? I mean, and one of the reasons why Dan Mullen hasn't had him throw very much when he's been out there is likely that he's still developing as a passer, and that's something that we're going to see. As far as the offensive line is concerned, I think it is important to remember the Cotton Bowl is December 30th. And they didn't have any bowl practices. And if you remember how much better the offensive line was last year between the end of the regular season and the bowl game against Virginia, now certainly Virginia probably had something to do with that, but we saw improvement over the course of all of those bowl practices heading into the bowl game. This year, obviously, the offensive line took a little bit of a step back. Part of that was because White got hurt real early in camp and then was never really back, and they were shuffling the offensive line to begin with. So I think you look at this and say, who can benefit the most from a Nick Savage offseason and a long Nick Savage offseason? It's probably the offensive line, right? So if they weren't knocking people back in December, I don't know why we would expect them to be knocking guys back in February. They haven't had any chance to get in the weight room to get stronger. The only thing they're doing is essentially working on technique and leverage, and there's only so much that can do, right? At some point, you just got to be bigger and stronger than the guy across from you. So it would probably be more disturbing to me if the defensive line wasn't playing very well, Because if the defensive line was getting dominated by the offensive line, I think that would say a lot more about what's going on than having the offensive line struggling to open up holes. They struggled to open up holes last year. It's likely not a technique thing. It's going to require an offseason where those guys get in the weight room and get bigger and stronger and faster. And then you come out in the fall and they're bigger and stronger and they start being able to execute their technique, and the offensive line is going to get better. So this is one of those, particularly if one of the things we said coming into the pandemic or coming into the season with the pandemic is that the strength and conditioning was going to be an issue. And I think we saw that, especially in the fourth quarter for Florida, just not being able to pull away. And with the offensive line this year, I think we're going to see that that's important. And you go back to the Emory part of things, and I think we just need to calm down. He's a different quarterback, right? And we got spoiled last year with Kyle Trask. I mean, when he missed Justin Shorter in the SEC championship game against Alabama, I was like surprised, right? You're sitting there going, "Oh my God, he missed one." And he'd hit Tony right down the sideline earlier in the game, and he was basically pinpoint the entire time. And when he missed a guy deep, it was really surprising. I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that not every quarterback puts it right on his receiver's hands 40 yards downfield every time. That's okay, because what Emory is going to do is he's going to make the defense make some really tough choices at the line of scrimmage with all of the run pass options, all of the read options, all the different things he's going to be able to do that are going to give him one-on-one coverage on little slants that are wide open. Right. And when you get to what, you mentioned earlier, the quarterbacks doing things that fit them, picking the things that they do well, that's what's going to happen is in the fall, Mullen's just going to say, okay, these are our base sets that we think Emory executes well, or that his skill set makes the defense make some hard choices. And we're going to let him execute that. And I think things will be a lot more crisp once that starts occurring.
Well, I kind of go back to Mullen's early in his career. Here at Florida, we know in 2018 what the offense ended up being, but remember the beginning of that year where Felipe Franks was throwing the ball just all the time. And, I think it was the first game of Dan Mullen, the head coaching team. I think Franks had thrown for 6 touchdowns or something. It was just going out there and we're going to let him go out there and work on what we need him to work on. We know we're going to beat this team by 50 points. That's, exactly what they did. Go out there and just throw the ball and work on some things. And so what we saw, and look, they probably carried that over into the Kentucky game as well, throwing the ball a little bit too much for that first loss of the season. But you could tell early on that they were just trying to get some confidence in Franks, letting them throw the ball as the season went on. More of a run-focused offense. I think that's kind of maybe a timeline for spring too. Open it up, see what Emory Jones can do with his arm. Then as late spring, going in the fall, you build your offense and the focus being more of the run game there.
Well, and Anthony Richardson too. I mean, the reality is that if nothing else, you need Richardson to be ready as a backup, because if you're going to have a quarterback who's running all the time, there's a shot that he's going to get injured, right? We saw it with Franks in 2019. Is that the reality is that when you're running, you might get rolled up on, hopefully not a broken bone like Franks, but if you get a high ankle sprain and all of a sudden you can't run, then maybe Richardson's in there as the backup. So you got to know what he can do as well. Same thing with Del Rio, right? That's the reality is all these guys need reps, and some of them might do some things better than others, and you need to know what those are, because if all you do is run the stuff that Emory does really, really well right now in camp, then what do you do when Emory gets hurt and all of a sudden you have to shift your game plan? You can't. And that's one of the things I think we should go back and give Mullen credit for, is that in 2019, when Franks went down, that was a run heavy team in 2019, the minute Franks went down, and then Trask came in and it was immediately a pass happy team. I mean, you think about that Kentucky game, and Trask was throwing the ball all over the place. Now, part of it was out of necessity because Florida was behind. But from that point on, Florida was a pass-happy team, which makes me think that they used their time in spring practice to understand what each guy did well and know what they were going to have to do if they had him in the game, because it just flipped immediately. Right. And the only way you can do that is if you know that Trask does this, and this well, compared to Franks, who does this, and this well. And, their evaluation was Franks gave the team a little bit better opportunity to win. But Trask was certainly capable of getting them a win because they were willing to make those changes.
So there's where the quarterbacks go. Of course, that I think you kind of maybe just have to start there. It's always the headline, but probably the biggest takeaway overall, Will, and coming out of that, was the defense took today. That was the takeaway from the first scrimmage. And Will, it sounds like something we discussed last week is taking shape early on. We mentioned last week, Ventrell Miller not taking part in spring right now, opening the door for other linebackers to get more reps. Sounds like they're taking a step forward with those available reps. Tyron Hopper, Derek Wingo flying around, making plays in the scrimmage. Hopper with a pick, almost had another one as well. Wingo was out there making a lot of tackles. Well, maybe in piecing some things together here, the defensive line played well, as we mentioned before, as they're just a mismatch right now up front. Maybe that filters to the linebackers for some better play, as we mentioned before. It's also told a good performance from Gervin Dexter, Desmond Watson again. Entire defensive line disruptive all night was the word there. And Will just told the overall effort was better on defense. Early focus on competition and aggression is paying off so far. And as I brought up last week, just as a joke before we kind of signed off, the 3 T's, technique, tackling, turnovers, all showed up in the scrimmage. For coming in early, all this good talk of being turned around in a new defense all starts, I think, with the basics there, what Florida had to get back to, and technique, tackling, turnovers all showed up in the first scrimmage. Sounds like the linebackers are off to a nice start. Young players, Kamar Wilcoxon, Donovan McMillan, Jason Marshall making impressions early on, while Trey Dean, Rashad Torrance getting the starts at safety. Jordan Young had an interception. So, defenses have a tendency to be ahead early on. But, Will, I'll admit it is nice to hear this, especially after the disconnect last year, that the basics seem to be improving. There's young players out there making a difference early on. Take of it what you will, of course. We can do, all we can do right now is discuss what's out there, but at least we're hearing it, and time will tell if it translates.
Yeah, well, the talent profile for the guys you just mentioned is pretty high up there, right? I mean, Gervon Dexter is expected to be a first-round draft pick by the time he's done at Florida. That's his profile coming in. Wingo and Hopper are both expected to be second or third round, right? So top-tier draft picks who are going to be major players in the NFL. That's sort of what their talent profile coming out of high school suggests. And I would say that at linebacker and defensive tackle, those are probably areas that are easier to evaluate at the high school level, not necessarily because you're going up against guys, you may end up going against guys who are inferior, but when you look at a linebacker, you can tell whether he can go side to side, right? You can tell whether he has instincts and can get the ball and can hit. It's a little bit different than you get one look at a quarterback who's got a cannon for an arm. He has a good game. And you go, okay, that guy's a star. And then you find out later that his accuracy leaves some things to be desired, or a wide receiver who's able maybe to beat a corner who doesn't have as much speed. And then when he finally plays against a top tier corner, starts to get shut down. I think linebacker is probably one of those areas where it's probably pretty obvious that those guys are good, at least at the high school level. So Wingo and Hopper have that profile. Now, obviously they didn't get on the field much last year, but again, when you think about the way Mullen has operated in the past, he has defaulted towards more experience. And then you think about what happened last year with no spring practice and a limited fall practice, getting ready for a 10-game SEC schedule. And you say, okay, I can understand why those guys maybe weren't ready to play. No excuses this year, right? They need to be ready to play for two reasons. One is, what happens if Ventrell Miller gets injured? It's going to have to be one of those guys who steps in. But the other reason is that these are the guys that you rely on to build your program. Like, these are the guys, the top 100 guys, are the guys who make it to the NFL. They're the guys who pop in college on film. They're the guys who really bring you championships over the long haul. And both Wingo and Hopper fit that mode. So it certainly is good to hear that they're flashing in practice. But the big things I want to hear is that they're keeping their gap discipline, that they're in the right spot, they're where they're supposed to be. Those are the things. Like, the talent will carry you a significant portion of the way, but you get out of position, and that's when you get gashed for a big run against Alabama. So those will sort of be the things I think, they aren't just going to have to make the big play. They're going to have to make the normal play in order to get Grantham and Mullen to trust them to get on the field. And so hopefully that's what we start hearing is that these guys aren't just making big plays and going all over the place, that they're in the right spot at the right time, that they're staying in their gaps, and that they're being effective in the things that are sort of non-glamorous, right? You get a 3-yard run where the linebacker holds up the pulling guard, and everybody goes, oh, okay, it's a 3-yard play. But if that linebacker had gotten mauled by the pulling guard, it's a 20-yard play. And those are the sorts of things that you don't see until the guy gets mauled. So those are the things that I think you're not going to see in spring practice, but as the season really starts, that's what you want to look for when those guys are on the field, is, are they in their gaps, and are they able to get off blocks and make the tackles when they have to?
Well, I think they just have to keep bringing it up till I guess we don't hear his name brought up. But true freshman early enrollee Desmond Watson. I mean, it's just his name just keeps being brought up, and like early on when the first week of practice and his name is brought up, it's like okay, he's a big body. They may find a way to work that in, but I wouldn't necessarily expect a whole lot his freshman year. But as we kept saying, you can't teach that size and that athleticism at that size, and he just keeps putting his name in there. And look, all word coming out was he flashed. You can definitely tell this is college and not high school because having maybe some trouble lasting a while in this situation when you're going, up against guys that are, I won't say more your size because he is a massive human being, and I'm not sure there's too many people out there, but more skill level, a higher skill level going against, and he may, he'll flash, and, he has to take some time off. So, that's where after spring practice, he'll get to some more strength and conditioning and be able to last longer out there on the field. But we can't go or practice. We can't go the first scrimmage without Desmond Watson's name being brought up. And look, he goes out there between the end of spring, stays healthy, get some better strength and conditioning. He may have a bigger role than I was pegging him out just a couple of weeks ago with his name being brought up.
Yeah, well, Florida defensive tackle, there's a reason they brought in 2 transfers.
Yeah.
The reason they brought in 2 transfers, they didn't have a whole lot of depth there. And Watson is a different player than Gavron Dexter, right? Dexter is a guy who's disruptive, a guy who's going to beat you off the ball at the snap, a guy who's going to be able to get around you and then hopefully power through you at the defensive tackle position as well. Watson is designed to stop the run. Right, he's the guy who's designed to take on the double team, to free up Dexter to have one-on-ones, to free up Zach Carter, to free up Brenton Cox to have one-on-ones on the outside. And if he can do that, then he's going to be a valuable part of the defense. Now, you bring up some great points about conditioning. One of the nice parts about that is that he's going to have this longer extended time before fall to get himself into playing shape. I mean, he's going to need to because granted he's from Florida, but at the same time, it's hot in the swamp in September. It's really hot and you need to be in good condition to do that. But 24/7 is comparing him to Terrence Cody. I think that's sort of what everybody thinks right off the bat. And Cody was obviously a big part of those Alabama defenses when Saban was sort of making that first run, overtaking Urban Meyer and really starting to push for the national titles that he's amassed there at Alabama. You can't underestimate the power of a space eater inside in a 3-4 defense. Like a guy who can force a double team and can generate some push up the middle allows the defensive ends to really pin their ears back, because if the quarterback steps up or tries to, he just can't. There's nowhere to go. Right. And so I think Watson can play a role. I think Watson can probably be a valuable contributor. I think that's probably what you're looking for. Like You're not looking for him to be like a dominant inside presence where you're like, oh my goodness, he's got 7 sacks or, 7 tackles for loss and just completely stops the run game. But I think,
but I do know in SEC games, is it's 3rd and 1, he better be in there.
Yeah. Well, in even less than that, in situations where it's 2nd and 6, right, where the defense has the option of either running or passing, to have a guy in there where you don't have to blitz to try to stop the run, where you have the freedom to fall into a zone, where you can play sort of the match quarters that Grantham likes playing sometimes, where he likes bringing pressure from different places. One of the things that you get caught, though, is if you bring pressure and you don't have people dropping into coverage, then all of a sudden there are holes in the zones, and good quarterbacks have been able to exploit that. But part of that is they haven't been able to get pressure with their front 4. So if you have Watson occupying 2 offensive linemen, allowing the rest of the guys to sort of eat, then, he's not necessarily going to get the pub for that. But I think he should, because the reality is that if he's allowing Brenton Cox to go one-on-one on the outside, Cox is going to have a lot easier time than he did last year when, I thought Tadaro Slayton played pretty well. I thought Kyrie Campbell played pretty well. But at no point did I look at those guys and go, those are game-changing defensive tackles. I looked at them and I said, they're decent SEC tackles who might have an opportunity to play on Sundays. You look at Watson and you say, okay, if he can drop the weight, if he can get in shape, and he can be one of those guys who eats space on 1st and 2nd down, he's a guy who could be an NFL draft pick, and a pretty high one too, if he ends up really being able to hold his own inside. That's been the thing I think that has been maybe the surprising thing when you see some of the video is how quick he is off the ball. Mm-hmm. So not just a matter of he's eating up space. It's a matter of he's beating the offensive lineman to the punch. He already has a leverage point when he gets there. And then he's big enough that it doesn't matter what the offensive lineman does at that point. You get the offensive lineman a little bit off kilter, and he's gonna push his way into the backfield. And that's something Florida has not had in a really long time. I'm thinking maybe like Sharif Floyd is the last time I think somebody who was really big on the inside who could do that. Very, very different players. But, the capacity to, Dominique Easley reminds me more of Gervon Dexter.
Right. Yep.
And Desmond Watson has the opportunity to potentially remind us of Sharif Floyd. But again,
Floyd, the last tackle, I think I remember having Florida who anywhere near Jonathan Bullard, maybe.
Yeah, but even Bullard.
And he still moved around a little bit.
I mean, Bullard, you start thinking about the defensive tackles Florida's had, and Bullard and, all those guys sort of remind me of Dexter. Much more than they remind me of Terrence Cody.
I was about to bring it up. You brought up Terrence Cody, and for some reason, I didn't put that comparison all too much. Conor O'Gara, Saturday Down South, had a real nice article on Watson that he released for Saturday Down South today. And they brought up the Terrence Cody comparison. So, Will, good on you there for identifying that one pretty early. And hopefully it turns out that way.
Well, Cody was a JUCO transfer, but he was a 3-star. So really sort of in the same range. And I'm sure one of the reasons why that he was just a 3-star is that there were concerns about his weight and concerns about his ability to participate on an SEC field on a regular basis. But, it's sort of, we talked a little bit last week about 3-down linebackers and even 3-down offensive linemen. You're not asking for Watson to be a 3-down defensive lineman. You want Zach Carter to sort of slide on the inside and have Bogle and Cox on the outside rushing the passer when you get 3rd and 12. Like, that's not when you want Watson on the field. When you want Watson on the field is 1st and 10, and you want it to be 2nd and 12. And I can't remember many times last year where there was a running play against Florida on a 1st down that turned into 2nd and 12. It was a really rare occurrence. Didn't happen very often. 3-4 years ago, it happened all the time, right? The defenses were always the offenses were always behind the chains, always in 2nd and 12, 2nd and 13. Makes it a lot easier for your defense at that point. Especially, the defensive backs played off so much last year. You don't have to do that if you're in 2nd and 12, 2nd and 13 right from the jump. And so Watson will have an opportunity to maybe give him that ability. But again, I don't think you want to rely on true freshmen. I think we were the star rating of Gervon Dexter made me think he was going to be more of an impact player last year than he was. I thought he was good. I didn't think he was transformational. I think he has the opportunity to do that this year. And so I think we need to give Watson the same sort of grace, right? That we can get excited about what we see on film. We can get excited about what's happening in spring practice. We can get excited about what could be in the future. But I would still say that, the expectation for a guy like that should be year 2, year 3 to really start contributing. So 2022, 2023 is when I think you expect to see peak Watson out there really impacting the opposing offenses. Next year, maybe we get a sneak peek, but I don't think it's going to be something where, where we're talking about him for postseason awards or anything like that by the end of year 1.
Yeah, those Newkirk, Shelton, those guys will get a lot of play as transfers in their one season as Gators. And like I said, Watson sprinkled in there, short yardage plays, situations that you mentioned too, Will, to put his big body out there and go make some plays. Donovan Mcmillan's another name I brought up, of course, a young true freshman out there, early enrollee. Mullen was asked about him today as well. And Mullen said, very smart player, coach's son, does the little things well. And I think that's what we want to hear for a DB, especially back there in that secondary at safety. Do the little things well. I think will take you a long way in setting the base for a good spring and hopefully a contributor at some point in the season. But as I said, Trey Dean, Rashad Torrance start back there at safety in this first scrimmage. So let's go back to the offense, Will. Big news, of course. Run game without DeMarcus Bowman. Missed last couple practices, missed the scrimmage as well, a minor knee injury. Nothing really to be concerned about, but holding him out precautionary reasons right now. Explosive has been so far early on in spring practice, but minor knee injury as it goes right now. I mentioned earlier they didn't have much help from the offensive line running between the tackles, the running backs, but are making things happen in space here. Lorenzo Lingard, 90-yard touchdown run late in the scrimmage. Pierce had a 40-yard run. Other backs did some nice things in space as well. Of course, not really much of a timeline. Lorenzo Lingard, his 90-yard touchdown run came late. Don't know if it was against the first-team defense, second-team defense, third-team defense. Doesn't really matter for me right now, Will, because, for something I harped on last season was the run game and lack of explosive runs. This was the welcome note. For now, it doesn't matter to me if it was against first team, second team, third team. It didn't matter what defense they were playing against last year. They couldn't hit explosive runs. So definitely a welcome note. It was an issue no matter the defense Florida played against last season. So hopefully this is a sign, a little bit of improvement in that area.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's a sign that the offense is progressing as opposed to one where the linebackers were all out of their gaps and the safeties missed some tackles, right? I mean, that's the thing you don't know. So, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Nobody knows. That's part of the fun of it all. But, so the Bowman injury is a big deal, if for no other reason because he's not getting reps that, he needs because he didn't play much last year and hasn't been in Mullen's system for an extended period of time. It's good to hear that Lingard's getting some opportunities. Certainly last year, I think we all expected to see him play a little bit more. I think he played a little bit on the last drive or two against Vanderbilt. And there were a couple of plays there where I thought he sort of flashed some skill or some speed, at least, that you don't necessarily see from the other running backs. The good news is that the running back position is pretty stocked. When you think about Dameon Pierce, Malik Davis, Lingard, and then you've got Bowman sort of as the fourth option, but potentially a starter as well, depending upon how well he plays. So I think they're stocked pretty well there. And considering how much criticism there was for the offensive line in all of these scrimmages, the fact that the running backs still looked good, I think is a good indication, because it means if you start getting adequate or above average blocking, then the running backs are going to be able to do what you want them to do. So, that's been a problem for Florida ever since Dan Mullen came here. I think last year, towards the end of the year, finally, Kadarius Toney was that guy that you said has the opportunity to take one to the house, anytime he touches, or at least be dangerous to get him all the way down the field. We kind of expected Trevon Grimes to turn to that guy. He never really did. Kyle Pitts was, fantastic for a tight end, fantastic really for any sort of player, but he wasn't really that guy who took the ball to the house that often. He was, most of his touchdowns came in the red zone. So, somebody who can take the ball 90 yards is somebody that, and having more than one of those guys is a big deal. The thing there that I think we need to really look for is which guys are catching it out of the backfield. Because the guys who are catching it out of the backfield are the guys who are going to get the third down snaps. And, if Lingard can take a 2-yard gain and make it 90 yards, that's great. But if he can't catch it out of the backfield, if he can't participate in pass protection, then he's not going to be on the field that much. So, again, those are the things you're not going to be able to pick up in the spring, but should become apparent pretty early. If Dameon Pierce and Malik Davis are getting all the snaps when the season starts, it's probably not pure running ability that's having them do that. It's probably because of the pass protection and then the pass catching that Mullen needs out of those guys to really sort of complete his offense.
Yeah, kind of one more time. Trouble running between the tackles, mostly due to the offensive line, but we're able to make some plays in space. All the running backs made some plays in space, but the highlights, Lorenzo Lingard, 90-yard touchdown run late, Dameon Pierce with a 40-yard run. Well, you mentioned it briefly early on. I think we had to point out, as in kept talking about Desmond Watson and keep hearing his name brought up over and over again. Another true freshman early enrollee. Look, you're gonna get that in spring. We'll see if it translates to anything during the season. Tight end, freshman, early enrollee, Nick Elksness. And look, I got to give him a shout out because he's been on the show. So of course I got to throw some love his way. Being on Gators Breakdown about a year ago after he committed, so I got to prop him up. But we've done so anyway, just because of what he's doing out there on the field. He continues to impress early on. Two things here, Will. Florida can really use a tight end that can block and catch in this shift of offense right now. Perhaps Elksness is on his way to help out in that regard with Gamble and Zipperer. We saw Florida play a lot of tight ends last year, even when Kyle Pitts was on the field. You can see it again this year with a more run-focused approach and some maybe 2 tight end sets out there in this offense with this Gator offensive shift. So, perhaps what Elksness is on his way. Great to hear about another young player doing well. And Will, just kind of, as you mentioned earlier, a youth movement of sorts for this team.
Yeah, well, I mean, 6'6", 220. That's the first thing I sort of look at. Is this isn't a guy who's 6'3" and isn't going to be able to differentiate himself down in the red zone. So if he's starting to flash on deep crossing routes, if he's starting to, one of the comments I heard was that he was actually pulling away after he caught the ball, which was something that you didn't necessarily see from some of the other players. And so, that's important, obviously. You're not going to be able to replace Kyle Pitts. You weren't going to be able to replace Kyle Pitts even with Eric Gilbert.
Right.
And so, there's going to be a drop off the tight end position. But within the Dan Mullen offense, tight ends are a really important part of it. And so Keon Zipperer has been somebody who has, who has shown a little bit of ability, especially last year. But I'm not completely comfortable that the tight end position is where exactly it needs to be. And, Elksnis was really one of the guys that Brewster went out and targeted as somebody that he wanted when he came to Florida. That was one of the first commits I think that he got when he was at Florida. And so you sit there and say, okay, your tight end coach went out, targeted a guy specifically in Jacksonville, went and got the guy, brought him into Florida. Now all of a sudden he's playing well because he was recruited for the system and for the coach who's going to be coaching him. I think that's a good sign, at least early on. Again, spring, it's all lies, but at the same time, to hear that about, and in particular because Florida was so lopsided in terms of recruiting on the defensive side of the ball in 2021. I mean, if you look at the class that they've got, a vast majority of the guys, I think Elksnis and Marcus Burke are sort of the top off, and then Dejon Reynolds were the top offensive guys that they had in that class. Everybody else is pretty much a defensive player, and so they're going to need some of those guys in the 300 and 400 range to step up. It's curious that we're hearing a lot about the true freshmen. You hope that we start hearing more about the offensive guys from the 19 and the 20 classes as things move on, because I'm happy that Elksnis is stepping up. But, I want to hear about some of the guys from the last couple of classes as well.
Yeah, with the struggles in the passing game, especially early on, what we heard, not a lot of notes about the wide receivers just because the passing game was struggling there. But, did get some word from the tight end position. Nick Elksnis continues to make some early note there in this spring practice with the very first spring scrimmage of here. So I think the next one is the 12th. So that'll be later on this week. And then the finale will be the 20th. I'm still waiting on. I know Scott Strickland said when they were announcing that it wouldn't be a traditional spring game, that it would be something on TV in there in kind of a working with the SEC network. Florida does, right, as of now, have a scrimmage scheduled the 20th. Maybe we get something with that on TV. That's kind of what I'm holding out hope for. Anyway, but as we said, Will, kind of hard to know what to take and kind of hard to know what to be happy about, what to be disappointed about. It's just kind of the nature of spring right now. I'll go back to it again, just because of what happened in 2020. If the defense is playing well, maybe the offense is going to take a further step back. No, don't think that way right now. They are going to take a step back, of course. I mean, that was one of the most historic offenses Florida's ever had on the field last year. Wouldn't be discouraged. If you're hearing good things about the defense, I take that and run with it right now. But I get the reservation from the fan base. It's just kind of the nature of spring ball right now. If the defense is doing good, where are you going to point it at? Is the defense really getting better? Or is it because the offense is going through some transition? So I get the questions out there. We're not going to know. All we can do is kind of just share it. We don't get to see it, even if we got to see it. It's spring football. We don't. It's so hard to take away spring and what you see in spring. But we can talk about what's out there right now anyway, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of expectations. That the expectations coming into 2020 were that this was Dan Mullen's year to beat Georgia to potentially win the SEC and get a shot in the playoff. And he came pretty close, right? I mean, things started to fall apart there towards the end, but, at the same time, came pretty close. I mean, a thrown shoe and a couple of plays against Alabama if Trey Dean doesn't fumble the ball after he gets targeted and you're up for the playoff and nobody's opting out. So the bowl game would have been completely different. So there's a scenario where last year plays out completely different. I look at my expectations for 2021 and I say those are not my expectations. Like, I don't think Florida should be favored against Georgia. I don't think Florida should be favored against Alabama. I don't know whether they should be favored against LSU. I think we'll sort of see as we head towards that game. But again, in a normal LSU year, I think that's maybe a toss-up or a game where, it could go either way depending on whose quarterback is playing better. So the expectations this year should be for development? Are we seeing the young guys getting better throughout the years? The offensive line taking a step forward? Are we starting to see the development of Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson? Are we seeing young guys rotate in the secondary, especially if some of the older guys are making mistakes? Those are all the things I think we're looking for in the fall. So those are the things we should be looking for in the spring as well. If your expectation is a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense, I think you're probably going to be disappointed in 2021, not because Mullen's a bad coach or not because the team is heading in the wrong direction, but just because of the way the timing sort of worked. Mullen caught lightning in a bottle with Kyle Trask, and then was able to couple that with Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney and have a really successful year last year. Most coaches take a dip in year 3. You can argue whether 8-4 is a dip for Mullen. I don't really think so, because you beat Georgia last year. So, are we going to have a little bit of a dip this year as you transition to a new quarterback? Maybe. But, at the end of the day, that still doesn't mean I'm not excited to see the growth pattern of the team. And hopefully that's what most people take out of this, is that, again, when a guy makes a mistake in the spring, it's not the end of the world. He's supposed to make mistakes in the spring. That's the whole point of it, right? Is make them in the spring so you don't make them in the fall. Because we saw what happened last year when you don't have a spring. All of a sudden, especially the first couple of games, you're making mistakes that you would have made in the spring. But instead it's against Ole Miss or it's against Texas A&M. It's costing you a game. Then your confidence sort of goes downhill and you can't stop anybody. So, we can use spring. We can just use these last couple of weeks as an example. 2 weeks ago, the defense can't tackle; they're out of position, and now we get to the first scrimmage, and it's the defense being lauded. Yeah, well, and it's not as though week to week and during a normal football season, you don't see ebbs and flows in terms of the way the defense or the offense plays, right? Like one week, the offense will come out and be great, and the next week they'll come out and they'll be kind of pedestrian, even in a normal year. So to think that wouldn't adjust scrimmage to scrimmage, or to think that, and this is something that, I hadn't really thought about till now, but you think maybe Mullen is calling some plays knowing that he needs to get his defense some confidence?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So you get him out there in the scrimmage and you say, the last thing I really want is everybody on Twitter going, oh, defense can't stop anybody. Grantham. Yeah, he's a great coach there, Coach Mullen. Thanks for saying that during the press conference. So in some capacity, the reports out of the scrimmage can also be designed to sort of feed the narrative and the confidence. Because you gotta think that those defensive guys didn't exactly walk around campus with their heads held high last year. And you really want them to get to start doing that, because you need them to be confident. One of the most critical things for a corner to have is amnesia. And none of the corners last year had any amnesia except maybe Kyrie Elam. Everybody else was always thinking about something. They were thinking about the last play as they were getting beat on this one. And they're going to have to start developing that. So hopefully this is an opportunity to do that. And I will be critical of Mullen when it comes to recruiting. I don't necessarily think that the transfer portal is the right way to build the program. Certainly there have been some reports recently about why some of those recruits have gone to Georgia and Alabama. It's mostly rumors at this point, but I think we all sort of assume that there's probably some truth that lies in there. And it is what it is, right? In terms of the recruiting. But I'll tell you, from an on-field perspective, other than the timeout fiasco in the SEC championship game, I feel like Mullen has done an excellent job in his entire time at Florida. So from a coaching them up standpoint, with a full spring and a full fall, I think we can be pretty comfortable. We're going to get the best we can out of the guys who are out there. It's just a question of, are those guys good enough when you come up against Alabama and Georgia and LSU? And up until this point, they have not been good enough for all three of those games. And we'll see whether they can do it in 2021.
Hope springs eternal. There we go. So best way I can put it right now. After the first scrimmage, and we'll get into the rest of spring practice all throughout here too. So, Will, what you got coming up? Reading reaction this week, man.
I have no idea. Oliver is taking so much time. I had expected to have like 3 articles out in the last 2 weeks, and I'm just going to bed. So, I
do not blame you.
So I'm doing my best. You figure you've already had 3 kids. The 4th one is probably going to be easy. Like, what you're doing, and nah, he's actually a really good baby, but it's time consuming. So.
You're older now too, so
well, that too. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. But yes, I'm old.
Just time passes. It's what'd you say? 6 years in between?
Yeah, I'm old, decrepit. I'm out of practice, and And I'm busy on Twitter reading all about the spring practices. So
Yes.
no, so I am still planning on having something.
I enjoy
about
our
Emory
late
Jones.
Friday. I enjoy our late Friday night, Saturday night Twitter DMs.
Yeah, well, all that means is I'm old and I'm not going out, right? and most people use COVID as an excuse for not going out, but for me, it's because if I have more than one beer, I'm going to fall asleep on a speaker at a club. So it is what it is these days. But now there will be something about Emory Jones the next week. Looking at some of the things he does well, some of the things I think he doesn't necessarily do well, and that's the next thing I'm working on.
I'm ready for after spring. We'll get through spring, talk all through what's going on in spring practice. But I'm going to go do some stuff on some run game stuff. Well, I'm going to go out there and look at, I don't remember watching enough of Mississippi State. It's certainly not his time at Florida, but the chances, and if DeMarcus Bowman comes back healthier, the chances of a workhorse running back, and what does history say about that from Mullen? So that's going to be my big research project when spring gets over with, is diving into Mullen's running backs and see what going from there. I think it's going to be very interesting this year with that part of it. So
yeah, that'll be cool. We've got some there were some things that came out right when he came to Florida where people were looking at some of the formational stuff that they do or that they did in the running game with Nick Fitzgerald. It'd probably be interesting to go back and unearth some of that too, because not just having the workhorse running back, but the formational stuff. He did a lot of weird stuff where his wide receivers were split out really, really wide to force the defense to make decisions pre-snap that that I haven't seen most other guys in college replicate, which is interesting. That now it does sort of declare what you're doing, but at the same time, it means your quarterback just has one read. It's you throw it if the linebacker does X, you run it if the linebacker does Y. You're reading the defensive end. If he crashes, you pull it out. If he doesn't crash, you hand it to the running back. So it's simple, but the formation makes it obvious, and Mullen's really good at doing that sort of stuff.
Awesome. So yeah, we'll get through spring, and then we'll dive deep into some other stuff like we always do here on Gators Breakdown. That'll do it for this episode. You can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC and his site readandreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.